get started asking about how you became involved in the film, particularly as the cinematographer, and maybe when you received the script and what you really liked about the script overall in terms of shooting the movie.
Sure. Um, I I became involved in the project. The writer and director Karen Chinore is my life partner. We live together. So when she first had the idea and wrote a treatment, I was there, and from the get-go, I knew about it from practically the moment it occurred to her. So she sort of ran it by me and wrote a treatment, and then I read the first draft, and loved it immediately.
And also, speaking about getting to work with Karen, I saw that this was her first feature as a writer and director, and what that
Yes.
collaboration was like working with her on her feature debut as well.
Sure, it was great. We worked together for a long time. We're longtime collaborators. In addition to living together, we made a lot of shorts and music videos and art installations. So it wasn't our first collaboration, even though it was her first time with a narrative feature. But it was great. She's, maybe a little biased, but she's brilliant and, very intensely visual and visually demanding in a great way. If you're someone like me, a cinematographer, she's loves it's very innovative script and storyline, both just character wise and emotional storytelling wise, but also visually. It's very epic and kind of an action adventure story. It's sort of like a modern Wizard of Oz story about a young woman finding her voice. And it's just an area I'd never personally worked in. I haven't really done an action movie before. I've done stuff with stunts and aspects of a lot of the stuff we did, but not in the way that Mayday specifically is.
And speaking of the action sequences as well, and I also wanted to ask about what that experience was like as the cinematographer to really figure out how you wanted to shoot those more action-driven scenes as well during film.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. It was very intensive. I've done a lot of work with stunts and cars and fights and even some explosions before, but not to this extent where they were all being put together and it was a major part of the story, on a consistent basis. So what was interesting was we were very fortunate we got to make the film in Croatia, and the crew was almost exclusively Croatian. There's a couple of people from the US. Our costume designer was from Poland. But the entire stunt team was all Croatian, and all the special effects team, the armors, people who did the firearm training, and so a lot of specifically the action stuff that was really challenging and interesting to do was there's a lot of motorcycle riding, hand-to-hand combat, and we had some explosions, some real life practical explosion. So it was really interesting. I shot a documentary in Croatia a while back, but I'd never done a project like this in Croatia. So it was fun to get to work with the team there. And in many ways, filmmaking is a kind of universal language, the way that you stage things and shoot things, and the tools that we use, like cameras. But there's always little subtle things in the workflow, the way country to country how people like to work. But it's great to get to share those kind of tribal customs with each other.
And speaking of the location, I actually wanted to ask about that experience as well, and how being on location really maybe influences the way that you shoot a film, and especially being in that part of the world, what that experience is like overall of really being on location there as well.
Sure. Well, we shot in an area of Croatia. It's called Istria. It's on the northern coast, and it's an area that's very popular for shooting. A lot of car commercials get shot there because they have these very beautiful cliffs that photograph in this kind of very dramatic way. But we weren't doing anything like that. We shot in a very rugged terrain and in the woods on a very rocky beach with these steep cliffs. And we scouted a few places. Our first choice was always Croatia, but not knowing if, that could be figured out, or, we scouted other countries as well, but we kept coming back to Croatia. And one of the big reasons was this area in Istria where we shot with these cliffs. When we'd walk on them, when we first scouted them, they're very steep. And, you have to be careful, obviously, not to get too close to the edge. But I remember one of the first mornings I woke up on our first scouting expedition in Croatia, I had nightmares about like getting too close to the edge, because they were scary at first, and we had to work out a whole safety protocol, and the team there is really great at that. But I had this nightmare about the edge of the cliff, and I woke up and I thought, we're on to something. If we can convey a sense of that, that danger just being towards the edge of the cliff, if we can somehow convey that on screen, that would probably be really great. And that, plus it just being, if you're someone like me who lives in New York, this Istrian coastline just looks otherworldly. Even if you live there, it wouldn't feel that way. That was my joke with everyone our crew who I loved, who all lived there. It was, there are these like very steep cliffs, and there are also these beautiful trees that you see, and you see the movie. They're sort of bent, like they go up and they sort of curve, which is from like centuries of wind blowing these trees to be sort of bent like that. But they look, to me, again, not someone who doesn't live there, they look beautiful and surreal, and they populate the backgrounds of the frame in a really interesting way. So that was, all of these things made it very exciting to stage the action on that particular location.
And can you also talk about what the process was like of really working on deciding which kind of lenses you wanted to use and the cameras, and what was that experience like also of figuring out which specific equipment you wanted to use to shoot the film as well?
Yeah, of course. Well, it's always interesting part of the process that, to pick the tools that you use. And for Mayday, we used anamorphic lenses, which are anamorphic lenses were created in originally 50, 60 years ago to create a larger image on a film negative. And so they compress the image on the film negative to have more resolution on film, and then with an anamorphic projector, it stretches the image back out, so which creates that widescreen effect. And then in so doing, the faces render in a really interesting way, and then the way things fall off out of focus is very expressionistic, and it's very graphic and dynamic looking. So much so that a lot of the time it's not my first choice to use, because it can be a very heavy look. And some people, like, that's what they want to use every time specifically because of that. But when I've shot for Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig on those particular projects, I always thought, this is a little heavy for what we're doing here. I want like a subtler approach. And they're very tricky. When I was coming up as a camera assistant and shooting a lot of film, they're very, when you shoot on film and can't see things clearly on a monitor, they're more challenging for things like pulling focus, and they're just challenging. They're not always easy to use. But for Mayday, because it's this kind of modern Wizard of Oz story with this beautiful landscape, I always thought this is the perfect movie to do that. These lenses were used very frequently on Westerns, and still are for when Westerns do get made. So anyways, that I picked these. They're called the Cooke Special Flare Anamorphic Lenses, or Cooke SF Anamorphics for short. I work with a great rental house. There's a few that I like a lot. the one in Los Angeles I like is called Camtech. The owner's a really brilliant guy named Kayvon Elami. And Kayvon's great to just have a artistic conversation about technical things. And I kind of knew for a few years before Mayday, since I was in on the ground floor, I worked on Mayday for quite a while. And I'm also a producer on Mayday, helped develop the material. But I used these Cook anamorphics for several years on TV commercials just to play with them. And they were, worked well for those commercials also. But I just really wanted to get to know them and see sort of just kind of analyze them and play with them and see how they rendered faces and colors. And I always thought, I kept coming back to them. And then I tested other lenses when it came time to properly test for Mayday, just to make sure and make sure I wasn't leaving anything out. But we came back to them, and then the ones that I liked they're not large format lenses. There's now a lot of Aeroflex makes the Alexa LF camera, and there's the Sony Venice. These are all large sensor cameras. At the time, these Cook lenses that I liked were not large format lenses, so we used the Alexa Mini camera, the digital Alexa Mini camera. And so that was that. And then as far as lighting equipment, I worked with a great gaffer named Jerry Mundy. We did Lady Bird together, and we had to be really smart. We used a lot of LED technology, ARRI sky panel lights. And then there's a Croatian technician named Senna. And Senna, he made his own particular, I think he was a pop star in the 80s, and then he became a film technician, and he built this great LED wall or LED panel light. Because it was, of the area, and gaffer Jerry in the capital city of Zagreb could go meet him and talk. It was fun to get to use materials that the local people in Croatia had either created, or what they had available was what we wanted to use.
And also, like you mentioned, also being one of the producers, and I also wanted to ask a little bit more about that experience and what that process was like of maybe balancing the producing with the cinematography as well.
Sure. Yeah. The producing, it was great. I had never done that before. I came up as a production assistant when I started my career. That's the only time I spent, for a couple of years working, in the production department. So I had that experience, which is not nothing. It definitely informed how I collaborate with producers and production managers, and my work is a very important part of the process. But for Mayday, initially, it's just Karen and myself with the material and no one else. And so as a producer, I helped develop the material. She wrote it. It's completely her vision. But just my experience having made other feature films and taking things through to post-production, and just having an editorial sense could help inform, and just having read a lot of scripts and being asked by collaborators to give notes on the script, I was able to do all of those things, help her develop the script in the way that a producer does. And then also, I think I was able to help find other producers to join us. So we worked with two very great producing partners, Lucas Joaquin of Secret Engine and Jonah Decent of Complementary Colors. And once they joined us, thank God, once we got into what I'd call like proper prep or pre-production, I was able to step away and step away in the sense that I wasn't like looking at every line of the budget, because we had a great line producer, Amanda Messenger, who I had met when I worked on Frances Ha for Noah Baumbach. And I think, I was able to just help bring people to participate. But then when we were properly shooting the movie, I had to step away. There had to be someone else, because it was scope of the project was too big for me to really be a producer at that point. But then once we wrapped, and particularly once, you know, COVID forced us all to quarantine and go inside, I was able to just, you know, be on phone calls to help with our festival strategy, and just kind of listen to all the information, and, you know, help corral people to watch the cut and give notes. And, you know, I'm probably the least objective person other than Karen in terms of the material and the story, because I've been with it so long. But in that sense, I can also help have her back, basically.
And speaking also of the festivals, I wanted to ask about getting to have a movie play at Sundance this weekend, and what that experience has been like of gearing up for like the virtual edition of the festival as well.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I've been to Sundance 3 other times as a DP, and one time before that when I was a camera operator. So I've gotten to have the, you know, in-person Sundance experience. I also spent a summer at the Sundance Institute as a cinematography fellow, workshopping other movies that, you know, Sundance Institute projects. And I mean, it's, you know, obviously incredibly different not being in Park City with the scrum and the circus of it all. But I have to say, we're really honored to get to participate, to be one of the 10 films in narrative competition, you know, and to be part of Tabitha Jackson's inaugural year as the head of Sundance, along with Kim Yutani and everyone. And I really admire them for you know, pushing forward. It's, you know, the thing that is still there is that you immediately become part of a community of filmmakers, very, you know, of progressive storytelling that everyone in the world at this point watches. Certainly all the studios in this country, and people are there to acquire things, but it's also, we watch each other's work, and, you know, we get to have discussions like the one you and I are having, and hopefully our thoughts get passed on to others, particularly maybe those, you know, people in the formative stages of their career, and the fact that you know, something like, for the feature film entries, something like 2,500 people per screening are able to watch. So there's so many movies, because Sundance is so progressive, that, you know, might not have mainstream distribution even in our streaming age. And the fact that people can buy a ticket for $15, or which is what it costs for ours, which is not that much. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's, you know, if it's important to people, that's not a crazy expenditure, and they have that access, and that's really great. I love that. I love that about it, that they're, you know, hopefully we'll all get distribution and find our way. But for those who maybe, you know, there maybe that might be a little buried, or it might take some time, they have that access to people who would never be able to go to Park City.
Okay, I think that was me, Lee, but thank you again for taking the time, and I
Oh
appreciate
yeah,
it.
very nice to meet you, Karen. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.